This is Book Public from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. In Mimi Herman's novel, The Kudzu Queen, a charismatic stranger named James Cullowhee arrives in Cooper County, North Carolina in 1941. He's there to spread the news about kudzu, the plant he touts as improving soil quality, cheaply feeding cattle, and even having medicinal effects. 15-year-old Maddie Watson falls for the pitch about kudzu, but also for the handsome stranger. Soon enough, the kudzu, a plant that is wildly invasive and can grow up to a foot a day, starts to take over the crops. Cullowhee, the kudzu king, likewise reveals another side to his magnetic personality and charms. I spoke to Mimi Herman about her novel, The Kudzu Queen. When people ask you what your novel is about, what do you say?
Ooh, good question. I tell people that it's about a 15-year-old girl named Maddie Lee Watson who meets the Kudzu King, and the Kudzu King comes to North Carolina to promote kudzu and have kudzu festivals and kudzu beauty pageants. And Maddie wants to be the Kudzu Queen, and she wants the Kudzu King to fall in love with her, even though he's twice her age, until she discovers his dark side.
Oh, there is a dark side. I have to be very careful not to spill a bunch of spoilers, because this is a very intense, but that's not the right word, but there are just a lot of things I don't want to spoil for the reader. The beautiful things, the sad things, the problematic things, the gorgeous things. There is so much to discover in this book. So I have to be very careful when you bring up the dark side of the Kudzu Queen.
Thanks so much, Yvette. I have to be careful in readings too.
So this is all assuming that people understand what you mean by kudzu. So do people generally know?
Yeah, well, do they have a lot of kudzu in Texas? Because I know they have a lot of it here where we live in North Carolina.
There's some in Texas, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So kudzu is, first of all, it's gorgeous. It is a gorgeous and horrifying plant. If you think of what was that movie where he would say, the plant would say, "Feed me, Seymour."
Oh, yeah. Little Shop of Horrors.
You think of Little Shop of Horrors and you think, "Feed me, Seymour." Then you kind of get kudzu, except it doesn't even ask to be fed. It just takes whatever it wants. So it was introduced as an ornamental around the turn of the last century, around the time of the Dust Bowl. They brought kudzu in and had the CCC planted along railway embankments to prevent erosion. They paid farmers to plant it. The Department of Agriculture created pamphlets to promote it and to teach farmers how to plant it. So it was supposed to be this miracle vine, and instead it took over the South. As a country, we are famous for bringing in things to solve problems and forgetting that they're part of a food chain. And when we don't bring in the rest of the food chain, those things take over, as kudzu did.
How did you get the idea to bring this story about kudzu into your novel and really create a novel around this idea?
Well, this will tell you how much I love libraries and how much I love old technology. A while ago, I mean, quite some time ago, I was wandering around the microfiche. And for those of you who are too young to know what microfiche are, think of something where you can look up articles and find out what happened in the past. Oh, wait, we have that. It's called the internet. But in those days, it was on sort of tiny little films. And so I came across this article on these men that went around the South promoting kudzu and having these kudzu festivals and kudzu beauty pageants. And I had grown up with this horrible invasive plant. And so I was stunned. And I write for the same reason I read, which is to find out what happens. So I could not believe somebody did that, and I had to figure out why. So I figured it out by inventing it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And the era is very specific. We're in 1941.
We are.
So there must have been even more research about other things.
Yeah. So there was a lot of research that I did for the book, a lot on foods and the language that was used. Even after the book was accepted for publication, I went through it again and found 320 changes that I wanted to make. Things like the word sharp, which when you're using it to describe how someone's dressed, like a sharp dressed man, that wasn't around until about 1945. And
Wow.
lemon bars weren't around until the 60s, and it's probably a good thing I took them out because I had somebody putting them in her purse, which is never a good thing to do with lemon bars anyway.
But you do something too with diction and with the dialogue here. I'm glad you're talking about this. It's timeless, but it's also of a time, like the
Mhm.
early 40s. I can't put my finger on what you're doing, but you do it where I'm reading it and I am sort of in that space of like a Barbara Stanwyck movie, precisely,
Ooh,
right? And the way
I love
people.
it.
Yes, and sort of like, the rhythms of the speech. I don't know, there was just something I could hear the voices of that time in my head, and it's just such a lovely thing. So no lemon bars, but let me tell you, when I was reading this novel, I if I was hungry, forget it. I was running to the kitchen to get something to eat. There's a lot of really good food, families at the table eating together. There's so many details like that that I just love.
Yeah, my favorite one is the beets that Maddie wants to send it on a slow boat to China because she hates beets so much. Yeah, when I went back through, I thought, there's a lot of food in here. So I started making a list of all the foods that were in there. And I love food. I love cooking. I love eating. I think food's a great invention. And when I saw how many foods I had in that book, I thought, you know what? The companion book to this has to be a cookbook.
I love that idea. But I started to think about that. We're in this small town in North Carolina, and many things revolve around eating and
Mhm.
meals. And the kids are going to go off to school. They're going to get on the school bus. They have to worry about the cornflakes for breakfast and what they're going to have for lunch and all of that. I just felt like, oh, that's so perfect because that is real life. If I'm eating breakfast, I'm wondering what I'm going to have for lunch. So something like that. And it is food of the time and of the place. I feel like this place in North Carolina is so specific,
Mhm.
and you really put us there. I've never been there, but and in 1941, to say nothing of that, but things like, oh, the fields and the front porches and Aunt Mary's house and the school even, or the queen practices at the mayor's house. Just beautiful, gorgeous, escaping into all of these spaces. I just love this book.
Oh, thank you so much, Yvette. I love hearing you talk about it because when I was writing the book, I felt like I was there. I mean, you were talking about the language being related to 1941, and I wasn't around in 1941, but when I was writing the book, I felt like I was. And so I'm glad to hear that you felt like you were when you were reading it.
Yeah, it right down to what the girls wear.
Mhm.
And, what was it? And it really stuck with me. The plaid skirt with the cream colored sweater or the
Mhm.
peach colored lipstick, all these little details. I mean, I just feel like, oh my gosh, it is a sort of a time travel. You just put us there in the place and in the time. I mean, something that I love is the mention of the movie stars that Maddie pines for, like Errol Flynn and Cary Grant, and how she and this young boy Carl go see the pictures, not the
Mhm.
movies, the pictures. And and the movie is, The Lady Eve with Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda. These kinds of things that just reinforce where we are. And yet there's still, a bit of, timelessness around the family story, the sibling relationships, the mean girls,
Mhm. Yep.
the everything that's happening in a kind of a Bildungsroman or coming of age with Maddie, who's 15. I was right in there with her, you know, fretting about school and boys and stuff. It's just so lovely.
Thank you. I have this theory that we're all like trees and that all the layers of our life, all the years of our lives are layers inside of us. And so there's a 15-year-old inside of us. And that's, kind of what I'm hoping will come out when people read this.
I totally hear that. This small town is kind of minding its own business, and here comes James Calloway.
Hmm.
Tell us about Jim.
Jim, he's a charmer. I've heard him compared to the Music Man, and
Yes, I
right,
was gonna ask you
right.
about that. I love that. I love that.
So my favorite thing is this idea that it's kind of the Music Man meets To Kill a Mockingbird.
I love it. That's a book I want to read, and that's a movie I want to see or a
I
play
love
I
it.
want to
Cool.
see.
Yeah. So Jim is charming. I think he has what he thinks are good intentions, but maybe not everybody else sees it the same way. I'm afraid to say more.
I know. What can we say? How can we? What's the workaround here for us?
Okay, well, he's handsome. He looks like a Greek god. He's a great salesman. He is selling kudzu to farmers who have been through the depression and are really afraid of losing money. He's selling it to the whole town. He's selling the whole town on the concept of kudzu. And he's like a movie star come to town.
He really is, and he's a shot in the arm. He
Hmm.
kind of energizes everybody. The mayor's wife, the
Hmm.
school has an assembly that's dedicated to him, and everybody
Hmm.
seems to be charmed by him. Everybody seems to want to believe him. Not everyone, but
Hmm.
almost everyone, and even some unlikely figures. And I guess I can say I think Maddie's older brother,
Yeah.
and that part is very important without spoiling anymore. But and of course the little brother Joey. But yeah, he's I feel like he's just who he is.
Hmm.
This character. Oh yeah, I don't want to spoil anything. But everybody is just so taken with him. He does have this movie star vibe. It seems like he can do no wrong,
Hmm.
and the kudzu is taking over, and so there's something very, very interesting there. These many moving parts,
Hmm.
including Lynette. I love Lynette and her story.
Oh, I love Lynette too. And
Ugh,
Aggie, her little sister. I mean, she's
oh,
got two little sisters, but Aggie for me is magical.
it just seems like we're so connected to so many interesting people and aspects of life because Lynette's Lynette's home life is not great.
No, it's pretty bad.
And I feel like there's such a story, there's just so many stories. And then but it's so kaleidoscopic here. I mean, we never lose sight of the central issues. They're all of a piece, but
Hmm.
there's not a word that's wasted or seen. It all is just like this beautiful mosaic that comes together and makes perfect sense. So many stories that interconnect, and they interconnect around Maddie, to be sure.
Hmm.
I mean, she's an observer. She's so observant. She's so watchful. This sort of prism of Maddie prism that we're able to look into and see all of these things. But yeah, Lynette's story. I don't know. It's so important to me. I don't know. I think about her a lot since I read the book.
Really?
Yeah. I read the blurb by Lee Smith that
Hmm.
claimed that this book, quote, demands to be a movie. Lee Smith is not wrong. I love that it's a book and it has to be a book. I'm not saying anything else about that, but it must be a book, and thank God it is. But I was thinking about what a terrific movie this would be, and I could
Wow.
see it in my head as a movie.
Wow, that is so great to hear you. Thank you.
But that's a tribute to your powers as a novelist and your storytelling more than anything else.
Thanks.
And I don't picture any movie stars or actors that I know. I picture just
Mhm.
people. Really. I picture Maddie a certain way, and it's not a movie star, an actor, or an actress that I know of. It's just
Yeah.
the most vivid movie already in my head.
Wow.
But have you thought about that? Have you thought about this idea?
Yeah, I would love for this to be a movie. I mean, it felt like a movie unfolding for me as I wrote it. I always think about, the story's happening and I'm just running around trying to keep up. running around behind the characters, writing everything they do and say and see and hear and smell and feel and taste. So, yeah, I would love to see it as a movie. But when I think about who would play anybody, I mean, I can come up with people, but honestly, most of the people that would play anybody in a movie they're too young now to know, you know,
Mhm.
um, who they are. And I think Maddie should be played by Maddie and Lynette should be played by Lynette.
Yeah. Yes. The book should just be, I don't know. I think the movies in our minds are pretty good too. You
Yeah,
know.
but I would love to see it. I'd love to see it on the big screen or the small screen or both.
Only because it has so many of those elements that I feel would play well that way, would sort of exist well in that space. I mean, there
Mm,
is so much here. I mean, it is a Bildungsroman. These are family stories, but there's a lot to unpack here around some of the weightier things about
mhm.
race and class in the South during this time
Yeah.
too. Very, very important in this book. And also sexuality, these power
Mhm.
dynamics of these young people at that time. And I hesitate to specify at that time because I feel like this has just been a problem since time immemorial and
Mhm.
remains so,
Yeah.
in spite of our awareness or our consciousness of about these kinds of things. But I think maybe in that era, it was difficult to manage these kinds of things or to talk about them and
Mhm.
then therefore to overcome them. What do
Mhm.
you think this book can teach us about these weighty issues? I mean, maybe that's an unfair question, and you can take any part of the question that you want, but
It's a really good question. Maddie's nothing like me. She's much more confident than I was at her age. Um, but the one thing that I really connect with Maddie on is I think there's this quality that 14 and 15-year-old girls sometimes have of trying on their sexuality for size and testing the waters. And I think that's exactly what Maddie's doing. And sometimes that ends up with, they end up getting more than they wanted, or they end up getting something that's different from what they wanted. So I think, and I think that's timeless. I think it happened in Maddie's time, it happened, before then, and it's still happening now. And I don't like to claim that it's a big category. I don't like the idea of victims, and I don't
Mhm.
think of that, because I think victim stories are not nearly as complex as what I want this story to be. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think I know what you mean. Yeah.
So I think of Maddie as trying that on for size. She's attracted to a man who's twice her age. So what's going to happen with that?
Yeah.
And of course, it gets even more complicated than that. But I had a long conversation with a friend, and we're talking about the fact that I wrote this book for adults. It wasn't until it was finished that people started saying, this could also be a YA book. And I have young students, and I've told them, I really don't want you to read this unless you've talked with your parents about it and they've read it first, because I think there's some things that are not good for pretty young kids, or, even 10, 11-year-olds. But so many girls that are pretty young are finding themselves in some challenging situations. So maybe it's helpful to know you're not the only one out there that's going through something that's complicated.
I agree. And Maddie is just, I mean, she really is wise beyond her years. This point of view that we have in the novel allows us to see just how she intellectualizes. She really does. Her whole thing about homeostasis, and she's just so she's so applying the things that she's learning
Mhm.
to these situations that she's in. But I hear what you're saying. She's very attracted to an extremely attractive person,
Mhm.
and she obviously is someone who the boys like too, and
Mhm.
they're of an age where I think they're starting to, as you say, try these things on for size, or they're curious, they're having these feelings. She talks a lot about these things that are going on with her body, these feelings
Mhm.
that she has in certain moments. It is a story that I think carries a resonance for probably for a lot of women who maybe experienced something like that, and it was confusing and inexplicable and these
Right.
sorts of things that we can't talk about, that they're not comfortable to talk about, but they happen. I can certainly see that. And it's somebody as curious as she is. She's
Mhm.
so curious about the kudzu
Yeah.
to begin with,
Yeah.
and she's interested in helping her family or helping the other families if this is possibly going to help them.
Mhm.
Her father is so enigmatic,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I see this language that she wishes she could have with him via the crops, or sort of the same things that he can talk to Danny about. Or there's just so much with her in terms of her curiosity and the things that she wants, or she thinks that she wants, how she
Mhm.
wants this small town to be, how it's sort of presented to her at any given moment, and how she resists and still dreams and still wishes and still aspires. I mean, that's a very human story. I feel like this is a novel for everyone, maybe in the same way that To Kill a Mockingbird
Yeah.
was always before they introduced it into the reading lists of the schools. In that way, that it was a novel, and then suddenly it was in the schools, and then
Mhm.
suddenly it was banned. But you know, so
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. I think a 15-year-old narrator doesn't necessarily imply that it's a book written for 15-year-olds. To me, this is written for all ages.
exactly. Now you're going to be at the Twig Bookshop on Wednesday, March 1st, in
Mhm.
conversation with Nan Q. But tell me, how is the book tour? How are you adjusting, first of all, to being back in spaces face to face in bookstores? How wonderful. And
Yes.
then now with your book out in the world, tell me about it.
Oh, it's been amazing, and I will say that I was one of the people that really kind of enjoyed being at home a lot, and I've masked up a lot, and even in advance of going into bookstores, I masked up a lot because the last thing I wanted was to have to cancel reading because I came down with COVID. I am stunned by how fabulous it's been going to bookstores, meeting people who've read the book, meeting people who want to read the book, having old friends appear that I haven't seen since before COVID. And it's just been this amazing, amazing experience. And I've been getting, emails and messages from friends and people that I don't even know, while giving me play by plays of their readings of the book. I'm on page 103 and this is what's happening. This just happened. So it's been beyond anything I could have imagined. I'm loving it.
Mimi Herman, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been just a deep pleasure. Thank you, Beth.
Mimi Herman is the author of The Kudzu Queen. This has been Book Public from Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.